This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for the week of June 26th through July 2nd. On this week's show, a cover version of a song becomes the definitive song of an entire genre, and the King makes a comeback and takes a bow for the final time. This first story is a perfect example of how a student can surpass a master. It's also the perfect example of how to do a cover version of a song. Back in 1928, jazz master King Oliver was at the top of his game. He was selling out concerts in Chicago, Illinois, and making classic recordings with a top-notch band. On June 11th of that year, he recorded a pretty decent version of a particular song. Now, until 1924, King Oliver had a member of his band who was a pretty good cornet player, I'd say. This member was a prodigy who studied under Oliver, but at a certain point, a student has to move on, so the teacher and the student amicably parted ways. Between 1924 to 1928, the student left Chicago, Illinois, and also switched instruments. He also made a name for himself elsewhere. However, the student decided to come back to Chicago for better opportunities. On June 28, 1928, the student walked into a recording studio in Chicago to record with one of his side project bands. His band consisted of himself, Earl Hines on piano, Jimmy Strong on clarinet, Fred Robinson on trombone, Mancy Carr on banjo, and Zutty Singleton on drums. The song he decided to record that day was that song that King Oliver had recorded only a few weeks earlier. However, the student didn't simply copy the song. No. He changed it up a little. For starters, he completely stripped the opening down to one instrument, his. Then, he improvised that opening. Also, instead of putting any vocals to the song, he did a new form of vocalizing called scat at about the 1 minute 25 second point of the song. The song became a big hit. Today, it is considered one of the greatest recordings of any genre and the greatest jazz recording ever made. It heralded jazz as being an art form. On that day, the student became the master, and with the master's song, no less. And even though both men would record the song many times over their careers, it is that trumpet player Louis Armstrong's version of that song, West End Blues, that is considered the classic, recorded for the OK record label in Chicago, Illinois, on June 28, 1928. Next, the music industry is full of gimmicks and publicity stunts. You see them all the time. Probably the most fun is when an artist tries to do different concerts in different cities or continents in a single day. There's a few different twists to that gimmick. During the Live Aid concerts, for instance, Phil Collins played in London, England, and then hopped the Concorde supersonic jet, flew to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and played the American concert, becoming the first artist to pull off that trick. In 2006, to celebrate the release of his 7th album, Kingdom Come, Jay-Z set the record for most concerts in the most cities in a 24-hour period by playing 7 concerts in Atlanta, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas. Going cross-country, but working the time zone changes to pull it off. An impressive feat because he spread out the shows and he also played 30-minute concerts. Jay-Z's shows set the Guinness Book of World Records for that feat at that time. That record would only last for 6 years. This next group did it one city better, but they kind of danced within the margins of the rules in order to get it done. In 2012, MTV had a short-lived award show called the O Awards, which honored music and technology. The award show, to be precise, was probably a bit ahead of its time. In any event, MTV decided to have a band break Jay-Z's record. That band was the Flaming Lips. The Guinness rules for the record stated that you only had to play 15-minute concerts, not 30 minutes like Jay-Z did. And here's where I will state my opinion that playing for 15 minutes does not constitute a concert, but it's not my rule, it's the Guinness Book of World Records rule, so what can I tell you? In any event, the Flaming Lips started show number 1 on June 27, 2012 at precisely 5:25 p.m. in Memphis, Tennessee. They played extra on that show because the official Guinness record started at 6:30 p.m., almost an hour later. Next stop was in Clarksdale, Mississippi at 9 p.m., then Oxford, Mississippi at 11 p.m. Show number 4 was in Jackson, Mississippi around 3:30 a.m. and then off to Hattiesburg, Mississippi for a 7:45 a.m. show. Show number 6 was in Biloxi, Mississippi at 10:30 a.m. and then a press conference before tying the record with a show in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and then setting the record for their own selves with 20 minutes to spare with a show at the House of Blues in New Orleans, Louisiana. For those of you counting at home, that is 3 different states in the same time zone doing mainly 15-minute shows, as opposed to Jay-Z going to 7 different states in 3 different time zones doing 30-minute shows. To me, Jay-Z's record stands as a more impressive feat. To be fair, though, Jay-Z did a lot of those shows at airport hangars to cut down on travel time. Again, it's not my rule. It's the Guinness Book of World Records, and that's the way that goes. The Flaming Lips, setting the record of 8 concerts in 8 different cities in 24 hours, June 27th through June 28th, 2012. After the mythical success of the 1985 Live Aid concerts, organizers tried to replicate the success and focus on local poverty in poorer countries. On July 2nd, 2005, the Live 8 concerts, a sequel of sorts to coincide with the 20th anniversary of the original July 13th, 1985 Live Aid concerts, took place to raise money and to also bring awareness to poverty. This set of concerts is not to be confused with the Live Earth concerts, which took place on July 13, 2007, and those put a spotlight on climate change. The Live 8 concerts were put on in the countries that comprise the G8 group of nations, i.e. the 8 richest nations in the world at that time, and were timed to happen just before the G8 summit, which was in session that week. It sort of worked. At least the public relations part did. 5 days after the concerts, on July 7, 2005, the G8 pledged to double the amount that they gave to poorer nations in 2004, with half of that money going to African countries. Whether they went through with their pledges, whether the money that they gave in 2004 was anemic at best, so doubling it was still pretty anemic, or whether what they did actually worked, well, that's for other podcasts to figure out. It's a subject to a whole lot of debate, I'm sure, especially in the current climate. There was a very valid criticism of the original concert lineup for this whole Live 8 thing. When organizers first announced who was performing at the different venues, the only non-white performer was Mariah Carey. That rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, especially when the official excuse that was given was that they wanted non-white artists with a global impact because it was a global event. So, let's tear that down a little bit here. The year is 2005. Let me think now. Which non-white artist could they have gotten aside from, I don't know, just to name a few, Michael Jackson, Prince, Janet Jackson, and a ton of other artists? The organizers got the point. They got some more artists like Kanye for the original set of concerts, and they also organized another concert in South Africa that featured African artists. The problem with the South African concert, though, was that it was held a decade after apartheid ended, but economic wealth was still mainly with the white minority, so only the white minority could afford the pricey tickets. Such is what happens when people forget about the political and social realities of life sometimes. Oh well, at least people at all the concerts were treated to U2, Paul McCartney, a reunion of Pink Floyd with Roger Waters and David Gilmour sharing a stage for, well, one time. Kanye, Will Smith, Jay-Z and Linkin Park, Coldplay, Stevie Wonder, Deep Purple, The Tragically Hip, Green Day, and the Pet Shop Boys. Wow, look at that. Kanye, Will Smith, Jay-Z, Stevie Wonder. Hey, I guess there were some non-white artists with global impacts. Who'd have thunk that? I don't know what the organizers are thinking half the time. In any event, the Live 8 charity concerts were held on July 2nd, 2005. In the late 1950s, rockabilly singer Ronnie Hawkins needed a backup touring band. He recruited bass guitarist Rick Danko, keyboardists Garth Hudson and Richard Manuel, guitarist Robbie Robertson, and drummer Levon Helm from other Toronto, Canada bands, and he named his band The Hawks. The Hawks got good playing the Toronto circuit, so good in fact that they had outgrown Hawkins. By late 1963, they left Hawkins over the usual creative differences excuse, but they did not break up. Instead, they went out on their own and used various names like Levon and the Hawks. They released a few singles and had even offered to be blues great Sonny Boy Williamson's backup band. Williamson dying not too long after that offer was made kind of put an end to that idea, unfortunately. In 1965, blues singer John Hammond Jr. recommended the Hawks to a guy who was looking for a backup band for his tour, a guy by the name of Bob Dylan. Dylan, after also hearing about the Hawks from his manager's secretary, Mary Martin, went up to Toronto to hear them play. Dylan hired the group right after that. They also stopped being called the Hawks and started going by the name everybody would soon know them by, the Band. During their 1965 to 1966 tour, Dylan went from playing acoustic shows to playing electric guitar, which did not sit well with the folk purists out there at all. They were outraged. Really outraged. In fact, during their concert at the Free Trade Hall in Manchester, England, one concertgoer screamed, "Judas!" to Dylan, to which Dylan famously answered, "Liar, I don't believe you." On July 29th, 1966, Dylan got into a really bad motorcycle accident. The injuries were so bad that he had to go into a sort of seclusion at his place in Woodstock, New York. The band continued playing small bars in the meantime, but Dylan needed a little company. It was kind of lonely up there. He invited the band to join him, so the band rented a house in West Saugerties, New York. They named it Big Pink after the pink color of the place. While they were there, the band started writing and finishing songs for a demo tape that would eventually become a much bootlegged album called The Basement Tapes, which got an official release in 1970s. After they were done with those songs, they decided that it was time to come out with their own album and stop being known as simply Dylan's backup band. Ironically, even though they wanted to do things on their own, they got a record deal with Capitol Records through the efforts of Dylan's manager, Albert Grossman, who was also their manager. They also kept the name The Band, used 3 of the songs that Dylan had written for their album, and Dylan did the artwork for the album's cover. Before they started recording, though, they actually had to get back Levon Helm, who had gone off to the Gulf of Mexico to work on oil rigs, and that was back when it was called the Gulf of Mexico, not the Gulf of America. You know what? That whole thing just got really stupid. 2025. Weird year. Anyway, once they were done working out the songs in upstate New York, the band went to Manhattan to record at A&R Studios in 1968. In 2 different sessions, they recorded Tears of Rage, Chest Fever, We Can Talk, This Wheel's on Fire, and the classic song The Weight, which gained popularity when they performed it at the original Woodstock Festival. Once Capitol heard the songs, they asked the guys to go to California to finish up the album. They recorded at Capitol Studios and also at Gold Star Studios, and there they recorded In a Station, To Kingdom Come, Lonesome Susie, Long Black Veil, and I Shall Be Released. John Simon produced the album. 3 engineers were used total: Don Hahn, Tony May, and Shelley Yuccas. Elliot Landy did the photography for Big Pink. The album Music from Big Pink, named after that house in upstate New York, was released on July 1st, 1968. Initially, it did okay, as it ended up being the 30th biggest album of 1968. The Weight was relatively popular, ending up at number 63 on the Billboard Hot 100 singles chart, number 35 in Canada, and number 21 in the UK. It is still considered to be one of the greatest debut albums of all time. The band's debut 1968 Capitol Records release, Music from Big Pink, released July 1st, 1968. There is one honorable mention, but it's an important one. On July 1st, 1979, Sony sold the first cassette Walkman. The importance of this cannot be overstated because from that moment on, music became more personal and portable. You no longer had to be in one spot to listen to an LP record player or carry around some sort of huge boombox at that point. And even though there were 8 tracks and transistor radios, well, you couldn't pick up whatever song you wanted to on the drop of a dime on a transistor radio. And the way that 8 tracks were actually made, you didn't get to sit and actually pick out which song you wanted. Immediately, you had to sit through a couple songs in order to get to the actual one you needed. Very inconvenient, I might say. But with a cassette Walkman, now you could take your music with you, put on your headphones, and most importantly, listen to whatever song you wanted to, whenever you wanted to, without being held hostage to a radio station playlist or the weirdness that was an 8-track player. It also meant either shoving cassettes into your pants pockets or carrying around briefcases full of cassettes if you were hardcore like I was with my music. There was also the whole thing about getting your cassette tape stuck or eaten by the Walkman. Such good times, and wasted money because it would really eat up sour grapes. You want to have some fun with your family one day, especially with the little kiddies? Put a cassette and a pencil next to each other and have them try to figure out what one has to do with the other. I look at it as a Mensa member test. If they can figure it out pretty quickly, put those kids into college immediately. The times I spent having to rewind with a pencil on my cassette and then having it chewed up and just wasted $14 or more. Oh, such good times. Such good times. Like the iPod over 20 years later, the Walkman technology was a game changer. The first Sony cassette Walkman sold on July 1st, 1979. Before we continue, we'd like to tell you about the Music History Today podcast, where we go over the events that happened on that particular day in music history. The Music History Today podcast drops every single day, including weekends, on this podcast network. Now, back to the Music History In-Depth podcast. Now, let us talk about the king of rock and roll, Mr. Elvis Presley. It is said that there were 4 phases to Elvis's career. The first was when he burst onto the scene full of youth and vigor, shaking his hips, outraging the parents, and of course stealing the hearts of their daughters. The second was when he was drafted into the Army and then came out and did movies. Really bad movies when you watch them now, but you kind of look back at them kind of fondly as a product of a bygone era. The fourth was Vegas Elvis, when he donned the white jumpsuits, put on a lot of weight, and mistreated his body until he unfortunately passed away. We're going to get to that fourth phase in a few minutes. But it was an event that happened during this week in 1968 that gave him his third phase. By 1968, Elvis was washed up as a rock and roll artist in many people's eyes. Sure, he was doing those movies, but they were campy and definitely about as far removed as you could get from what made Elvis Elvis, his swagger. Sorry, but Clam Bake does not have the same swagger as Hound Dog or Don't Be Cruel. Viva Las Vegas, however? Well, okay, maybe. Dig that song. Also, during his movie phase, he had put on a few pounds. Plus, Bob Dylan and the Beatles had stolen the swagger spotlight, and rock and roll had changed into hard rock and psychedelic rock. Elvis needed career help fast, or else he was going to become a permanent afterthought, banished to the land of, hey, whatever happened to... His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, sold NBC TV on an idea for a TV special, which was to be a variety special originally. The director of the show, Steve Binder, saw it a different way. He wanted to do a mini concert. It was to be a more intimate affair, with Elvis jamming in an intimate setting with his band, where they would joke around and play some songs, of course with a lot of pretty women around him. I mean, come on, he's Elvis. Elvis signed on to the concept, but first, he had to get into shape. He took his wife, Priscilla, and a then very young Lisa Marie on an extended family vacation in Hawaii. And when they all came back, Elvis was tan and, most importantly, trim like his younger self. On the night of June 27th, 1968, dressed in his now legendary black leather outfit, they began to record the special. It still almost didn't happen, though. Elvis got a case of stage fright, and even though he was calmed down, you could see how nervous he was at first if you pull up the clips on YouTube. Of course, Elvis being Elvis, those performing instincts kicked right back in and the swagger came back. After the success of the special, Elvis started doing concerts again. Unfortunately, a few years later, he also fell into the excesses of fame and turned into the caricature Vegas Elvis until his untimely death. Still, for one night in 1968, Elvis reminded people why he was, and always will be, the king of rock and roll. June 27th, 1968, when the King came back and recorded his comeback TV special, which, just for the record, did not air until December 3rd that year in time for the Christmas season. After the success of the special, Elvis started doing those concerts again. And at this time, though, his young marriage to Priscilla Presley had started to deteriorate. He also started taking various prescriptions. He had always been against some other typical things that musicians are known to be taking, but felt, like a lot of people, that if a doctor was involved in prescribing it for you, then it wasn't illegal and therefore it was okay to use. At least that's what he thought. The Presleys divorced in 1973, which starts phase 4 of our career. By then, his health was in a tailspin. He ended up almost dying twice in 1973 from his prescription issues. He kept touring during this whole time, found himself a new girlfriend, but really, he wasn't the same. According to members of his band, he would fall out of the limo taking him to the performances, not being able to stand up. He would lean against the microphone, slurring the words to his songs sometimes. And he gained weight, a lot of weight. In short, Elvis was in a really bad way. His record label became concerned. Not so much about his health, mind you, but because he wasn't into recording albums anymore. His bodyguards started speaking out, but much like what happens when people start speaking out about such matters, they were unceremoniously let go. Good luck finding future employment, I guess. They did go on to write a book about Elvis's issues that was released only 16 days before his passing, a book Elvis tried to have stopped, but to no avail. In 1977, Elvis embarked on a cross-country tour. He started on February 12th in Hollywood, and then swung east for a bunch of shows before going to Hawaii for a vacation in early March. After his vacation, he came back on the road, but before he had to cancel some shows due to a stay at Baptist Memorial Hospital on March 31st. At the time, the press were told that it was for fatigue and an intestinal flu. April and May saw him hit the road strong, crisscrossing the country back and forth. Elvis took the next couple of weeks in June off before doing a bunch of shows in the last 2 weeks of the month. He played Kansas City, Missouri, Omaha, Nebraska, Rapid City, South Dakota, Madison, Wisconsin, and Cincinnati, Ohio. On June 26, 1977, Elvis Presley played at Market Square Arena in Indianapolis, Indiana. It was an 8:30 p.m. show. He walked out on stage to classical composer Richard Strauss's masterpiece, also Sprach Zarathustra, Opus 30, a.k.a. the theme music from the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. That's probably what it's better known as. Then he went into C.C. Rider Blues, I've Got a Woman, Amen, Love Me, Fairy Tale, You Gave Me a Mountain, Jailhouse Rock, It's Now or Never, Little Sister, Teddy Bear, Don't Be Cruel, Release Me, I Can't Stop Loving You, Bridge Over Troubled Water, Early Morning Rain, What I Say, Johnny Be Good, I Really Don't Want to Know, Hurt, Hound Dog, and finished off with Can't Help Falling in Love. He walked off the stage. The announcer gave the traditional, "Ladies and gentlemen, Elvis has left the building." And that was it. 21 songs, the vast majority of them being cover songs. He gave one of the best performances of the year, according to a lot of people. What people couldn't have known at the time, including Elvis, was that it was the last performance that he would ever give. Elvis went back home to Graceland, and there he was supposed to rest up, then start the next leg of his tour. He was scheduled to start back up with 2 shows in Portland, Maine, then have shows in Utica, Syracuse, and Uniondale, New York, Hartford, Connecticut, Lexington, Kentucky, Roanoke, Virginia, Fayetteville, and Asheville, North Carolina, before finally finishing the month with 2 shows at the Mid-South Coliseum in his hometown of Memphis, Tennessee, in a sort of homecoming. Those shows never happened because on August 16th, 1977, Elvis passed away due to his heart not being able to take the excesses of his lifestyle any longer. We'll talk more about his death about 6 weeks from now when we get to that week in music history. The King of Rock and Roll, Elvis Presley's final concert, held at Market Square Arena in Indianapolis, Indiana on June 26, 1977. This next story concerns one of the most legendary voices of the past 40 years. This man learned to play the piano by ear when he was 3. When he was a teenager, he was on the first season of Sesame Street. Yes, Sesame Street. Learning his ABCs. He was singing in a group that performed at the Apollo Theater. He went back to play the Apollo early in his adult life during the infamous amateur nights. He was booed off the stage a lot, for the record. In the early 1970s, he founded the Patti LaBelle fan club. He also started doing backup vocals for Roberta Flack, Chaka Khan, Barbra Streisand, David Bowie, and Todd Rundgren. He had actually carved out a great career as a backup singer and also as a singer for commercials. He was also part of the group Change, who had a gold debut album. However, like most great artists, he wanted more from his own career. Finally, he was offered the opportunity to have a solo career. His first album debuted in 1981. It became a huge hit. During his extensive solo career, he amassed 35 million records sold and 8 Grammy Awards. One of his Grammys was for Song of the Year, which would sadly be his last Grammy. On April 16, 2003, he suffered a stroke, possibly brought on from diabetes and hypertension. He was in a coma for a couple of months, but came out of it, but not for the better. The stroke left him with problems speaking, and he was wheelchair-bound. On July 1st, 2005, the man who sang with David Bowie on the song Young Americans was on Sesame Street and had an extremely successful solo career with songs like Never Too Much, among many others. Mr. Luther Vandross passed away from complications from that stroke. This week's birthday is a legend on many fronts. In her 92 years of life, she was a jazz singer, a dancer, an actress, and a civil rights activist. This Brooklyn, New York native spent her childhood traveling around before finally coming back to New York City. At the age of 16, she started her career as a showgirl at the famous Cotton Club in New York City, and then started performing in nightclubs including Cafe Society, performed around America with orchestras, and made recordings. But soon, the siren call of Hollywood started calling out for her. She started doing nightclub acts on the Sunset Strip and started performing in a number of movies. After spending almost a decade making movies and also dealing with the racism in the movie industry, specifically at MGM, she decided to concentrate more on her nightclub career and less on her movie career. She was also caught up with the McCarthy-era anti-communism movement, having been blacklisted by Hollywood after her name was listed on the Red Channel's report. Listen to last week's Music History In-Depth podcast for the story of how the Red Channel report decimated the music industry back then. In fact, after the 1950s, she rarely acted in movies. She found a lot of work doing theater shows and appearing on television variety shows and episodes, winning Grammy Awards and Tony Awards along the way. She also was heavily involved as a civil rights activist long before the civil rights movement of the late 1950s and 1960s. She refused to perform for segregated audiences during World War II, especially when performing for soldiers. She was at the March on Washington in 1963 and worked on various causes with the NAACP. Among the awards that she's won, aside from Grammy Awards and a Tony Award, are an Emmy Award, 2 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, one of a very select few people who have multiple stars in different categories, a Kennedy Center's Honor, a Drama Desk Award, and she is a member of the International Civil Rights Walk of Fame. The lady was a trendsetter. It is said that she was way too soon for Hollywood. I believe that because of her and people like her, she helped to make the Hollywood careers of so many multicultural people possible. That lady, whose signature song was Stormy Weather, endured through that storm. The legendary, iconic Miss Lena Horne, born June 30th, 1917. And that is it for the Music History In-Depth podcast for June 26th through July 2nd. Thank you very, very much for listening and or watching if you're on YouTube or Spotify.